My name is Naomi Caro, and for 31 years I believed my parents loved me the way parents are supposed to love a child. I believed the version of my life they told me, the one where I was the responsible one, the practical one, the daughter who didn't need much because I had always been good at making do with less. I believed it the way you believe the color of your own eyes without ever thinking to check a mirror. It took a spreadsheet, an ordinary gray file on an ordinary Tuesday evening, to show me that the mirror had been lying to me my whole life. I want to tell you how it started because it didn't start with anger. It started with something so small I almost didn't notice it, the way you don't notice a hairline crack in a windshield until one cold morning it splits the whole glass in half. I grew up in a quiet brick house on Larkspur Lane, the kind of street where every lawn was mowed on Saturday mornings and every family seemed to be doing exactly as well as the family next door. No better, no worse, at least on the surface. My father, Richard, worked in commercial insurance. My mother, Diane, stayed home until I was 12, and then went back to part-time bookkeeping for a local dental office. I had one younger brother, Tyler, 2 years behind me, and from as far back as I can remember the household had a shape to it, an order, an unspoken hierarchy that nobody ever explained to me but that I understood the way you understand gravity simply by living inside it every day. Tyler got the new bike. I got the one from the church rummage sale, sanded down and repainted by my father in the garage, and I was told to be grateful, and I was. Tyler got braces the moment the orthodontist recommended them. I was told my teeth were fine enough, and that braces were expensive. And when I was 17 and finally asked if I could get them myself with babysitting money, my mother said there was no point spending money on something so trivial when I'd be leaving for college soon anyway. Tyler went to a private summer camp for 3 summers in a row. I got a job at the public pool as a lifeguard, which my parents told me built character. I want to be clear about something because this is important, and because if you've lived anything like my life, you'll understand why I need to say it. None of these things on their own felt like proof of anything. They felt like the ordinary friction of being the older child, the more capable one, the one who didn't need coddling. My parents were not cruel to me. They hugged me. They came to my choir concerts. My mother made my favorite lasagna on my birthday every single year without fail. If you had asked me at 25 whether my parents loved me, I would have said yes without a flicker of hesitation, and I would have meant it. But there is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being loved and yet never quite prioritized, and I carried that loneliness for so long that it became part of the furniture of my personality. I built my whole adult life around not needing things. I put myself through community college and then a state university with a patchwork of grants, loans, and 3 jobs, while Tyler's tuition at a private liberal arts college in Ohio was paid for in full, no loans, a fact I only learned by accident when I overheard my mother on the phone with my aunt, saying with quiet pride that Tyler would graduate completely debt-free. Isn't that wonderful? I remember standing in the hallway outside the kitchen, holding a laundry basket, feeling something shift very slightly inside my chest, like a picture frame tilting half an inch on the wall. I didn't say anything. I told myself it made sense. Tyler had gotten into a better school. Tyler was more academically gifted. Tyler needed more support because he struggled with anxiety, something my parents mentioned so often growing up that it became a kind of family weather, a permanent condition everyone accommodated without question. I was the strong one. Strong people don't need support. That was the story, and I lived inside that story for years the way you live inside a house you've never really looked at from the outside. The story might have stayed that way forever, quietly humming along under the surface of family dinners and holiday phone calls, if not for what happened after my father's stroke. He had the stroke in March on a Wednesday, while he was raking the last of winter's dead leaves out of the gutter along the side of the house. My mother found him slumped against the ladder, and the next 8 hours were the kind of blur that I still can't fully reconstruct even now, more than a year later. Hospital corridors. Fluorescent lights. A doctor with kind eyes and a tired voice explaining words like ischemic and left hemisphere, and we'll know more in the next 48 hours. My father survived, but he was different afterward. Slower on his right side. His speech came out unevenly for months, words arriving late to his mouth like guests who'd gotten lost on the way to a party. I flew in from Denver, where I'd been living for 6 years with my husband, Marcus, and our son Eli, who was 5 at the time. I took 2 weeks off work unpaid because I'd used up my paid leave the year before when Eli had his tonsils out. Tyler, who lived only 40 minutes from our parents, came by twice during those 2 weeks. Once for about 3 hours, once for barely 90 minutes, both times leaving early because of work stuff that he described only vaguely. I didn't say anything at the time. That was who I was. I didn't say anything. I handled the meetings with the physical therapist. I sat with my mother while she cried in the hospital cafeteria, holding her hand across a table sticky with spilled coffee. I drove to the pharmacy 4 times in 1 week because the insurance kept rejecting different medications and someone had to sit on hold for 90 minutes at a time to sort it out. I slept on the pull-out couch in my parents' den for 12 nights, waking every 2 hours because my father's new nighttime confusion sometimes had him wandering the hallway, and my mother, exhausted herself, needed someone else awake in the house. It was during the 13th night, when I couldn't sleep and went looking for a notepad to write down my father's medication schedule so I could leave clear instructions before flying home, that I first opened the drawer in my father's office desk. I want you to understand that I wasn't looking for anything. I was looking for a notepad. That's it. That's the whole boring truth of how everything started. And I think about that a lot now, how the biggest turning point of my adult life began with something as unremarkable as needing a piece of paper. The drawer stuck a little, the way old wooden drawers do in humid weather, and when I finally worked it open, I found not a notepad but a slim green folder, the kind with a metal clasp, tucked beneath a stack of old greeting cards. On the tab, in my father's neat block handwriting, were 2 words: Family Ledger. I almost closed the drawer right then. It felt like snooping, and I have never in my life been a snoop. Not through jealousy of a sibling's diary. Not through curiosity about Christmas presents hidden in closets. But something about the phrase family ledger caught in my mind like a fishhook, and before I fully decided to, I had already lifted the folder out and was sitting on the edge of my father's old leather desk chair with it open on my knees. Inside was not, as I first assumed, some kind of will or estate document. It was a spreadsheet. Printed, not digital, though I would later find the digital version too, dozens of pages stapled together, dated across nearly 2 decades, tracking what appeared to be gifts, loans, and, as I read further, direct financial support given to each of their 2 children. I remember the exact feeling in my stomach as I began to understand what I was looking at. It wasn't shock yet. It was a kind of slow-motion vertigo, like the moment on a roller coaster right before the drop, when your body understands what's about to happen a half second before your mind catches up. The columns were labeled simply: date, recipient, amount, purpose, notes. I scanned down the page, my finger tracing lines under lamplight that felt suddenly too bright and too dim at the same time. Tyler, private camp, $1,100, 2003. Tyler, tuition supplement, $6,000, 2011. Tyler, tuition supplement, $6,000, 2012. The word supplement appeared over and over, and it took me a moment to realize that meant there had been additional payments beyond whatever base tuition amount I'd already known about. Payments made quietly, consistently, year after year. I flipped to the section with my name. Naomi, birthday gift, $50, 2011. Naomi, birthday gift, $50, 2012. There was no Naomi, tuition supplement anywhere on the page. Not once. Not in 19 years of records. I sat in that office chair until nearly 4 in the morning, going through page after page with the kind of focused, cold attention I usually reserved for closing out end-of-quarter reports at my job. I am, by profession, a financial analyst, and I want you to understand what that meant in this moment because it changed everything about how I process what I was looking at. I didn't fall apart. Not that night. That night, I did something that surprises people when I tell them, something that surprises me a little even now. I took out my phone and very quietly, so as not to wake anyone in the house, I began photographing every single page. I told myself I was doing it for clarity, that maybe there was context I was missing, maybe some of these supplements were loans that Tyler had paid back and that I simply hadn't been told about, maybe this ledger only told part of a larger, more balanced story. I wanted badly for there to be an explanation that didn't require me to rewrite 31 years of memory. But even as I photographed page after page, some colder, more analytical part of my mind was already doing the math, and the math was not kind. By the time I finished, running totals scrawled in pencil in the margin of my own small notepad, the numbers told a story that made my hands unsteady in a way they almost never were. Across 19 years, my parents had given Tyler what appeared to be, at minimum, just over $211,000 in documented supplements, gifts and loans that were later marked, in my father's same neat handwriting, with the word forgiven. My total across the same 19 years came to $4,300, almost entirely birthday and Christmas gifts of $50 or $100 at a time. I closed the folder. I put it back exactly where I found it, beneath the stack of greeting cards, and I closed the drawer, and I sat in the dark office for a long time, listening to the old house settle around me, the radiator ticking faintly in the hallway, my father's uneven snoring drifting from the bedroom down the hall. I did not cry. I want to tell you that because I think people expect the moment of discovery to be dramatic, tearful, cinematic. Mine wasn't. Mine was quiet and strange and cold. Like stepping into a room you thought you knew and realizing the furniture has all been rearranged while you were asleep. I flew home to Denver 2 days later. I hugged my mother goodbye at the airport curb. I told my father, whose speech was still slow and careful, that I loved him and that he was doing great with his recovery. And I meant it because loving someone and being furious with the architecture of your family are apparently two things that can occupy the same body at the same time without canceling each other out. For the first few weeks after I got home, I didn't tell anyone. Not even Marcus at first, though he could tell something had shifted in me. He's the kind of husband who notices when I go quiet in a particular way, the way that means I'm working something out internally before I'm ready to say it out loud. He didn't push. He just made sure there was coffee ready in the mornings and took Eli to the park on Saturdays, so I could have a few hours alone with my laptop. I spent those hours over about 3 weeks doing what I do best. I built a second spreadsheet. I didn't do it out of spite, at least not consciously, not at first. I told myself I was doing it because I needed to understand in cold hard numbers what exactly had happened, because a lifetime of vague unfairness feels one way, and a documented itemized 20-year pattern feels like something else entirely, something you can hold in your hands and examine from every angle. I cross-referenced the photographs I'd taken of my father's ledger with my own memories, with old bank statements I still had saved from college, with texts I dug up from years-old phone backups, with a few emails from my mother that I'd never deleted because I am, by nature, someone who keeps things. Slowly, methodically, over long nights after Eli was asleep, I built a document that laid out, in painful, undeniable detail, exactly how the money in my family had flowed for nearly 2 decades, and exactly how the story I'd always been told about being the strong one, who didn't need help, had, in fact, been the story that justified giving almost everything to my brother instead. It wasn't only tuition. As I dug deeper, I found a car, an Audi, purchased outright for Tyler when he turned 25, appearing in the ledger under gift, vehicle, $28,400. With a note beside it that simply read, no interest, no repayment expected. I found a down payment on Tyler's condo, $41,000, marked family gift in a way that, I would later learn, allowed it to be excluded from certain loan disclosure calculations. I found what appeared to be nearly $9,000 in what was labeled emergency support, given to Tyler over a period of 18 months, a stretch of time I now remembered had coincided with a period when Tyler told the family, vaguely, that he was between opportunities. Meanwhile, my $4,300 sat there in the ledger like a small sad punctuation mark at the end of a very long sentence that had never once been about me. I want to pause here and tell you something important because I think it matters for understanding what I did next and why. I did not, even then, want revenge in the way you might expect. I didn't fantasize about screaming matches or dramatic confrontations at holiday dinners. What I wanted more than anything was simply to be seen accurately. I wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside of my own head. Documented, undeniable, real. For 31 years, the story of my family had been written entirely by other people, and I had been handed a role in it, the strong one, the capable one, the one who didn't need much, and I had played that role faithfully because I didn't know there was an alternative script sitting in a green folder in my father's desk drawer. The spreadsheet gave me the alternative script. Still, I didn't act right away. I sat with it. I let it settle, the way you let a bruise finish forming before you decide whether it needs a doctor. During this time, something else happened that I think is worth telling you about, because it added a second layer to everything, one I hadn't expected. In June, 3 months after my father's stroke, my mother called to ask, with the particular gentle but firm tone she used whenever she wanted something without wanting to seem like she was asking for it, whether Marcus and I might be able to help out a little with my parents' expenses going forward, now that my father's income had dropped due to his reduced work hours. She mentioned, almost in passing, that Tyler had his own financial pressures right now, and couldn't really contribute much, and that since Marcus and I were doing so well out in Denver, it seemed only fair that we step up. I sat in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, looking out at Eli playing in the backyard, and I felt something in me go very still and very clear, the way water goes still right before it freezes. Of course, I said. I'll look at what we can do. I did not say what I was thinking, which was that I had spent 19 years quietly absorbing the label of doesn't need help, while receiving $4,300 total, and that Tyler, who had received over $211,000, was somehow now positioned as the one who couldn't contribute, and that I was once again being asked to be the strong one, the reliable one, the one who filled in the gaps that the favored child left behind. That phone call was, I think, the moment the spreadsheet stopped being simply a private reckoning and became something I intended to use. I didn't rush it. I want to be honest about that because I think there's a temptation in stories like this to compress the timeline, to make it seem like discovery leads immediately to confrontation, but real life doesn't work that way, or at least mine didn't. It took me another 4 months to decide what I actually wanted to do with what I knew, and during those 4 months I consulted quietly and carefully with 2 people. The first was my Aunt Carol, my mother's older sister, a retired paralegal who had always had a slightly wry, watchful relationship with the rest of the family, someone who attended every holiday gathering but seemed to observe more than participate, like a documentary filmmaker who happened to also be related to her subjects. I drove 3 hours to see her on a Sunday in September, ostensibly for a casual visit, and over coffee at her kitchen table I showed her on my laptop the spreadsheet I'd built. She was quiet for a long time after she finished scrolling through it. Then she said something I still think about. She said, "Naomi, I always wondered why you never asked for anything. I used to think it was because you didn't need it. Now I think it's because you were taught very early that asking wasn't for you." I cried finally at her kitchen table, the first time I'd cried through this entire process, and Aunt Carol simply reached across and held my hand, the way my mother had held mine in that hospital cafeteria. Except this time it felt like something was being given back to me instead of taken. Aunt Carol didn't tell me what to do. She told me something more useful, which was to think carefully about what outcome I actually wanted. Did I want an apology? Did I want restitution? Did I want the relationship to survive in some altered form, or was I prepared for it to end? She said that revenge fantasies feel powerful in the moment, but often leave people holding nothing but the wreckage of a family they still, somewhere underneath the anger, loved. She said the people who come out of situations like this feeling whole are usually the ones who acted from clarity, not from the need to make someone else hurt as much as they'd been hurt. I thought about that for weeks. The second person I talked to was a family law attorney named Priya Nathanson, recommended by a coworker who'd gone through a contentious inheritance dispute of her own. I met with Priya not because I intended to sue anyone, but because I wanted to understand factually what my legal position actually was, particularly regarding my parents' estate and whether documented lifetime gifts of that magnitude to one child could legally affect the division of an estate later, especially since my parents' will, which I'd never actually seen in full, was rumored within the family to split everything equally between Tyler and me. Priya was calm and precise in a way I found enormously grounding. She explained that lifetime gifts don't automatically get factored into estate division, unless a will specifically accounts for them through what's sometimes called an advancement clause, and that without such a clause, Tyler could, in theory, inherit an equal share of whatever remained despite having already received a vastly disproportionate amount during my parents' lifetimes. She said this happens more often than people think, and that the emotional damage in these situations often outlasts the financial damage by years, sometimes decades. She also said something that stuck with me even more than what Aunt Carol had said. She told me that documentation like the ledger I'd found is powerful not necessarily because it belongs in a courtroom, but because it removes the fog. Families like mine, she said, often survive for decades on a kind of collective fog, an agreed-upon vagueness that lets everyone avoid an uncomfortable reckoning. The moment you introduce clear documentation, the fog can't survive. People have to either acknowledge the truth or actively choose to keep lying about something that's now impossible to deny. I left her office with a folder of notes and a strange, settled feeling, like I'd finally found the shape of what I wanted to do. I decided I did not want a lawsuit. I did not want to destroy my parents financially or drag Tyler through some public humiliation. What I wanted was for the truth to be spoken clearly, in front of the people who had spent decades pretending it didn't exist, and I wanted it to happen in a way that could not be deflected, minimized, or rewritten afterward the way so many uncomfortable family conversations get rewritten within days into something softer and more forgivable. I decided the moment would be Thanksgiving. I want to explain why Thanksgiving mattered because it wasn't arbitrary. Every year, my mother hosted a very particular kind of Thanksgiving, one with a toast before the meal where each person was supposed to say what they were grateful for. It was a ritual that had always felt, to me, slightly performative, a moment where our family displayed its gratitude to itself, out loud, as if repetition alone might make certain feelings true. For years I had stood at that table and said something small and safe. This year I decided I would use that same ritual, the one designed for comfortable curated gratitude, to instead tell the truth. I flew in 3 days early with Marcus and Eli, staying not at my parents' house but at a hotel 15 minutes away, a decision that already unsettled my mother slightly when I told her, though I simply said we wanted Eli to have his own space to nap without disrupting anyone. The days leading up to Thanksgiving were strange, suspended, like the stillness before a storm that only I could see coming. I helped my mother peel potatoes. I sat with my father in the living room while he worked slowly through physical therapy exercises with a resistance band, his right hand still not quite as strong as his left, and I felt a genuine, uncomplicated tenderness for him even as I carried, folded carefully in my bag upstairs, a printed copy of everything I'd found. Tyler arrived Thanksgiving morning with his girlfriend, Ashley, both of them cheerful and a little loud in the way of people who have never once had to wonder whether they belonged somewhere. I hugged him. I meant that hug too, in whatever complicated way you can mean a hug for a brother you love and also now see with painful clarity. Dinner was, for the first hour, exactly as it always was. My mother's lasagna sat alongside the turkey because she always made both, a small tradition specifically for me since childhood. And I remember thinking with a strange ache how that lasagna was itself a kind of contradiction, real love expressed in one language while an entirely different message was being written in the ledger of the family's finances. When my mother stood, wine glass in hand, to begin the gratitude toast, I felt my heartbeat slow down instead of speeding up, the way it does right before I present a difficult quarterly report at work, that specific practiced calm that comes from having prepared so thoroughly that fear has nowhere left to live. My mother went first, thanking everyone for being there, thanking God for my father's recovery. My father spoke next, slower than before his stroke but steady, thanking my mother for her patience, thanking me specifically, for the 2 weeks I'd spent caring for him in the spring, a mention that made my throat tighten unexpectedly. Tyler spoke about his new job prospects and how grateful he was for family support this year. A phrase that landed in my chest like a small, precise blade. Then it was my turn. I stood up slowly. I had rehearsed this moment more times than I could count, in the shower, in the car, in the quiet hour after Eli fell asleep, but standing there for real, glass in hand, the words still felt like they belonged to someone braver than I usually let myself be. I'm grateful for a lot of things this year. I began, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. I'm grateful Dad is still here with us. I'm grateful for Marcus and Eli. And I'm grateful, honestly, for something I found back in March, while I was staying here taking care of Dad. The room didn't shift yet. Nobody knew yet what was coming. My mother smiled, expecting, I think, some warm anecdote. I found Dad's ledger, I said. The green folder. The one that tracks what's been given to me, and to Tyler over the years. I watched my mother's smile falter, just slightly, a small crack in porcelain. My father went very still. Tyler frowned, confused, glancing between our parents like he was trying to catch up to a conversation that had started without him. I want to be really clear, I continued, keeping my voice even, the way Priya had gently coached me to, calm, factual, not accusatory in tone even though the content itself carried its own weight. I'm not bringing this up to ruin Thanksgiving. I'm bringing it up because I've spent 31 years believing a story about myself, that I was the strong one, the one who didn't need help, and I only recently learned the actual numbers behind that story. I reached into the bag at my feet, the one I'd brought upstairs 3 days earlier, and I placed the folder on the table beside the gravy boat, beside the lasagna my mother had made just for me. Over 19 years, I said. Tyler received a documented total of $211,000 in gifts and forgiven loans, tuition supplements, a car, a down payment on a condo, emergency support during his gap year. I received $4,300, almost entirely birthday and Christmas gifts of $50. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator in the next room and somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog barking twice and going quiet. "I'm not here to ask anyone to pay me back," I said, and I meant it, I truly did, that had never been the goal. "I'm here because when Mom called me in June and asked Marcus and me to start contributing to help with expenses, because Tyler was under financial pressure and couldn't help, I didn't say what I was thinking. I said of course. And I've been saying of course my whole life. I think I deserved to stop." Tyler's face had gone pale, his fork resting motionless against his plate. "Is this true?" he asked, looking at our parents, and there was something in his voice I hadn't expected, not defensiveness, but a kind of dawning, uncomfortable realization, as if he too had been living inside a story that had never quite added up and simply hadn't wanted to look closely enough to notice. My mother's hands were trembling slightly around her wine glass. "Naomi, that's not. It wasn't like that, it wasn't a competition, you were always so independent, we thought." "I know what you thought," I said gently, because I found in that moment that I didn't actually need to be cruel, that the numbers themselves were doing all the work cruelty would have done, without requiring me to raise my voice or say a single unkind word. "I'm not angry that Tyler struggled sometimes and needed help. I'm not angry that you helped him. I'm asking why help was something that had to be earned by me, and simply given to him." My father set down his fork very carefully, his still slightly weakened hand moving slowly, deliberately. When he spoke, his post-stroke speech came out unhurried, each word placed with visible effort. "We should have talked about this years ago. I kept that ledger because I always meant to make it right eventually, in the will. I just never got around to it." "There's no advancement clause in the will," I said quietly. "I checked. Which means right now, if nothing changes, Tyler and I would split whatever's left equally, on top of everything he's already received." I hadn't meant this as a threat, and I want to be honest, some part of me worried in that silent moment that it might land as one. But I said it because it was true, and because Priya had taught me that the truth, stated plainly, is not the same thing as an attack, even when it makes people uncomfortable. Tyler, to his credit, and I think this surprised me more than almost anything else that day, was the first to really break the silence in a way that mattered. He looked at me, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, he looked genuinely ashamed. "I didn't know it was that much," he said quietly. "I mean, I knew Mom and Dad helped me a lot. I guess I never let myself add it up. Naomi, I'm sorry. That's not okay." I hadn't expected an apology from Tyler specifically, and it caught something in my chest, a small, unexpected loosening, like a knot finally given enough slack to breathe. The rest of that Thanksgiving was not some tidy, cinematic resolution. My mother cried in the kitchen for a long time while my father sat with her, and I gave them space, taking Eli outside to kick a soccer ball around the backyard in the cold November air while Marcus quietly cleared the dinner table, sensing correctly that I needed a few minutes to just breathe. But something had genuinely changed, and it kept changing in the weeks and months that followed, slowly and perfectly, the way real change usually happens rather than the sudden, dramatic way it happens in movies. My parents met with an estate attorney 6 weeks later, and my father called me afterward, his speech still deliberate but his tone clear, to tell me that they had amended their will to include an advancement clause, formally recognizing the $211,000 given to Tyler over the years, and adjusting the eventual division of the estate to account for it. He also told me quietly that he was sorry that he hadn't understood, until he saw the numbers laid out in my own spreadsheet beside his handwritten one, just how lopsided the story had actually been, and that he had spent his whole life thinking of himself as a fair man without ever once checking the math. My mother took longer. Some conversations happened slowly, in small pieces scattered across many phone calls, rather than in one clean moment, and ours was like that. But 4 months after that Thanksgiving, she sent me an email, subject line simply "I've been thinking," in which she wrote, more honestly than I think she'd ever written to me before, that she realized she had spent Tyler's childhood worrying about his anxiety so constantly that she'd unconsciously treated my calm as a resource rather than a trait that also deserved tending, and that she was sorry it took a spreadsheet in a desk drawer to make her see it. "Tyler and I are still rebuilding something between us, carefully, the way you rebuild a bridge you've only recently realized was standing on a foundation you never actually inspected." He paid off a portion of what he called, in his own words, the debt I didn't know I owed, not to me directly since I never asked for repayment, but by significantly increasing what he now contributes toward our parents' care, taking over responsibilities I used to quietly absorb by default. It isn't perfect. Old patterns don't dissolve overnight just because they've been named out loud. But it's real and it's honest in a way our family had never quite managed to be before. As for me, I think the biggest change wasn't in my parents or in Tyler at all. It was in myself. I stopped saying of course automatically. I started asking plainly for what I needed in my marriage, at my job, in every corner of my life where I'd once assumed that needing things wasn't really for someone like me. Marcus told me, a few months after that Thanksgiving, that I seemed lighter somehow, like I'd set down something heavy I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it wasn't simply part of my own body. I think about that green folder sometimes, sitting in my father's desk drawer for all those years, patiently waiting, the way truth often waits, not asking to be found, simply existing quietly until someone finally opens the right drawer looking for something as small and ordinary as a notepad. I didn't set out to blow up my family that night. I only wanted, finally, to be seen accurately, to have the truth of my own life exist somewhere outside the confines of my own memory, undeniable, documented, real. And in the end, that's exactly what the spreadsheet gave me. Not revenge, not really. Just the truth laid out in careful rows and columns, impossible at last for anyone to look away from. I still have that folder. Not my father's original, the one with the metal clasp, still tucked in his desk drawer beneath the greeting cards where it's lived for 2 decades. I mean my own copy, the one I built during those long nights after Eli was asleep, printed now and kept in a plain manila envelope in the bottom drawer of my home office, beside our tax returns and Eli's birth certificate. I don't look at it often. I don't need to anymore, not the way I did in those first raw months, when I would pull it out sometimes just to remind myself that what happened to me had actually happened, that I hadn't imagined the shape of my own childhood. Last spring, almost exactly a year after my father's stroke, we all gathered again, not for Thanksgiving this time but for his birthday, a small dinner at my parents' house with just the 6 of us, Tyler and Ashley, Marcus and Eli, my mother and father. My father stood to make a toast, something he almost never did, and he raised his glass and said simply that he was grateful this year for honesty, even the kind that arrives late and uninvited, because it was better, he said, than the comfortable silence that had nearly cost him a real relationship with his own daughter. I didn't cry that time. I just smiled and reached for my mother's lasagna and let myself, for the first time in longer than I could remember, simply enjoy being at that table, not as the strong one, not as the one who didn't need anything, but simply as myself, finally seen, finally counted, finally, after 31 years, part of the story instead of merely holding it up from underneath. Eli asked me on the drive back to the hotel that night what Grandpa's toast had meant, why everyone had gone quiet and then hugged for so long. I told him, in words a 6-year-old could hold on to, that sometimes people love each other very much and still get the details wrong for a long time, and that the bravest thing you can do isn't to stay quiet and hope things fix themselves, it's to tell the truth gently and clearly, and trust the people who love you to be able to hear it. He nodded seriously, the way small children do when they're turning over something bigger than they fully understand yet, and then he asked if there would be more cake tomorrow, and I laughed, really laughed for what felt like the first time in over a year, and told him yes, there would definitely be more cake. That, I think, is the real ending to this story, not the confrontation at the Thanksgiving table, satisfying as that moment was, but this quieter one months later at an ordinary birthday dinner, where the truth had finally settled into the family instead of sitting hidden in a drawer, and where, for once, I didn't have to carry any of it alone.